Okay, so good morning, everybody. Hope you can hear me okay. Welcome to MPW London's A-level class this morning with Jessie Venegas. So we have quite a few of you joining this session. Normally, just to let you know that during our daily lessons at MPW, we would have a maximum class size of 8 and 10. But this is trying to emulate an actual lesson as to, as similar as possible to what you would find at MPW. So we do hope that you will be interactive, ask questions as we go along, but do keep your microphones muted for now, and we hope you enjoy. So over to you, Jessie, and wish you well. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm not sure if they can see me because I've put my screen in and I can just see my presentation, but can people see me?
We can just see your Donald Trump.
Okay, all right. Great. Just a little audit, just so that I know what part of the world you're joining me from. Can you just put in the chat, and if somebody can read it out to me, what countries you're joining us from, and whether you're students or agents or parents, just so that I have an idea on the things that you might find interesting as I go along. Are we getting some responses on the chat?
No, there may be a slight delay, but I would assume that most students here will be, they will be students, not agents, just to let you know.
From which countries?
So
Italy?
Yes, there's some from Italy, from Asia, from Russia.
Russia, I can see here. Okay, so let me see. Russia, Italy, Taiwan, great. Excellent. All right, so we have a good mixture of students. So now here's a question that a lot of people ask. And so we all know who Donald Trump is, the president of the United States. I teach US politics, which is why I am picking on Mr. Trump today. But the question is he the most powerful man in the world? And I'm curious to know what you guys think. So if I can see what you're writing in the chat. Any ideas? Is he the most powerful man in the world? Is there more powerful people in the world? What are your gut feelings about this? Okay, I can see somebody else is joining the conversation, so I'm looking for some answers. Do we agree or disagree with this question? So Carlotta says in the position he is, yes. Anybody else?
Hello, I'm sorry, can I talk?
Yes, you can talk.
Yeah, I can't seem to access the chat feature, so is it okay if I use the mic?
Tell us what you think.
Okay, I think that I'm from Malaysia, by the way. I think that Donald Trump is one of, if not the most powerful man in the world. But I think that recently, Xi Jinping, the president of China, I feel that he is also, gaining momentum.
Okay, great. Any other ideas? If you want to use the microphone, that's perfectly fine. Any other opinions on this? Okay, all right, so I'll move on. In the politics class, at last time I did a law class, and law is very much, I tell you the information, you can do us. Okay, so somebody else say case, if he would stop the strikes. That's a very, very interesting comment, and I will come back to that comment later on the presentation, but it's a very interesting, I'm guessing you meaning the protest going on at the moment with the Black Lives Matter movement. Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, great. Hello. Yes, and so there is a good reason. That's a way. Why can't Trump just go and stop him right away? And so now this is a very loaded question, because when we talk about power, we have two things to consider. So is he the most powerful? We think about, what do we mean by power? What does power actually mean? Do we mean political power? Do we mean military power? Do we mean the power to get things done? And the other part is, what do we mean by the world? And there is a tendency sometimes when you're in the West to think of the world as the Western world, ignoring in great parts other parts of the world. So when we consider the different political context of different countries, my argument today is that yes, Donald Trump is powerful, but not really nearly as powerful as we think, not particularly when he's compared to leaders in other nations like Russia or China. And we will look at the reasons why this might be the case. And I think in many situations, this is a reason. It was a bit of a surprise to Mr. Trump when he became president. And I'll walk you through why that's the case. So my answer is maybe. And I'll give you some points if you can tell me who that in the picture. Do we have any Iranian students? All right, I'm going to leave it until the end and then you can tell me. Has anybody seen this film? Team America World Police. It's a rather rude film if you haven't seen it. It's very rude, and it's sort of making fun out of America in terms of its role in the world stage and the way that America, and I say America, tentatively, I don't really like it, call it America, because actually it's the United States, because America is the entire continent. I'm from South America, and I'm not part of the United States, but calling it America is a little bit contentious, if you was. But the fact that they call it Team America World Police is really poking fun of this notion of America seeing itself as the police force in the world and seeing itself in its influence as very powerful. And the question is it really that influential? Is it really that powerful? Where does that power and legitimacy come from? Why does it, if there is a conflict in the Middle East or a particular country, does America feel that they can intervene? Is that right? Is that wrong? And there is a lot of schools of thought around the debate. And I'm not here to tell you what to think or what conclusions to draw. It's very much, giving you ideas of what to think about. And I encourage you, if you disagree with anything that I'm saying, or if you want to challenge it, please bring your microphone and say it, because that's what the politics class is all about. We cannot have a good debate unless there is diversity of opinion. So I want to start with this image of America as the world police. And it's sort of a funny cartoon version of this. But how this actually plays in the geopolitical level, it can be quite interesting. So when we think of America, and I have a very controversial picture on, one of the biggest roles of the US president is be the commander in. What does that mean? It means that the American president is the commander-in-chief of the military. It's the highest ranking military officer in the entire United States. He has the nuclear codes, so we talk about people who have the nuclear codes. He has the power of commanding the US Army, and he has the power to, order attacks in other countries. Now, before you think all this completely terrifying, now there are certain limits to that power. He can't just do that willy-nilly. America, has arguably the largest and most powerful military in the world, although there have a lot of competition in other parts of the world at the moment. But one of these notions of the United States president being the most powerful man in the world comes from this notion that he's the commander-in-chief. However, the American president is also the servant of the people. And that means that his role is purposely designed to be as powerless as possible. So you have this very interesting dichotomy between absolute power, being the most powerful man, the most powerful person of the most powerful military in the most powerful country, which is in a way the way America wants to see itself. But at the same time, his role and the way that America is being constructed is being designed to make him the least powerful part of the government. So you might say, well, how does that work? What's the point of that, having someone that is elevated to be seen in the world as the most powerful person, but also in a system that is purposely designed to make him as powerless as possible? So what I'm going to do in today's lesson is I'm going to walk you through 4 objectives. The first is we're going to look at the history of presidential power. And we're going to look at the history of the United States, how it was founded, why it was founded, and why the question of presidential power is central to American history, and it's the foundation to everything. And it will make sense as to why Trump can't, stop the protest, and why he can't do a lot of things that you think a powerful person should be able to. Second thing is we are going to identify U.S. power, the presidential power in the U.S. and its limits, and we will look at the actual legal basis of the presidential power. What can the president do, and what the president can't do? And as you will see, the American Constitution has a very, very, very long list of things that the American president can't do. So it's actually the list of what he can't do is much, much longer than the things that he can do. And actually the things he can do are very limited, but there is a huge difference between what's written in the law and what actually happens in reality. So then I'm going to walk you through as well the systems of checks and balances. And as I go along, I will explain how the system of checks and balances is similar and different from what happens in the United Kingdom. Okay, so let's just do a little very, very quick history lesson. Now, if you were in my class, we would actually spend a great deal of time going through this, and but I'm just going to give you a very quick crash course, and you might know about this already. But America used to be a colony of the United Kingdom or of England, and can anybody tell me who this man in the picture is? Hello? Do we have any answers over there? Can anybody hear me? Yes, it's a king. Anybody idea what king his name was and what period and why I'm putting him up here?
King George III.
Yes, well done. Okay, what can you tell me about King George III? Okay. No takers. All right. So when the Americas were discovered, and I put air quotes out so you can see me discovered, because there is the fact that the word discovered is used is quite controversial, because many people argue that Europeans didn't discover the Americas because there was native people there who had seen them already, so there was no discovery there. But when the Americas were discovered and settlements were created, these colonies were part of they were part of the British Empire, if you will, of an earlier version of that. And so the king commanded because he had the entire power. However, a lot of people became very dissatisfied with that. But they didn't just become dissatisfied with him personally, but this notion of somebody having absolute control over all the laws, deciding how much taxes people pay, deciding what the laws were, changing their mind, in not being elected in that role, but just being born into it. So that grew a lot of discontent. And as I say, I'm grossly summarizing this in a very short period of time. But when America was created, it was created specifically to make sure that nobody would be as powerful as the king. So the entire DNA of the United States is very much at reacting against someone who acts as powerful as the king. So that makes sense why Donald Trump is so attacked in the press, because he has this very much, he's used to being a company boss. When he's a company boss, he's in charge of everything. What he says goes. But a leader in the United States context who behaves in that way, who is powerful and decisive, it's considered to be, or acts like a king, will automatically raise everybody's backs up, because the entire system is created to preventing someone from having that much power. And so, of course, every time he says something in the press that sounds quite authoritarian, he will have backlash. Every time he says something that he wants to do something, people will block him. And now you might think, oh, well, that's showing that the system is chaotic and the system is not working. But what the founding fathers of the United States would have said is actually the system, it is designed that way. It is making sure that no one can be that powerful. And there's reasons. So ensuring that the people in the US would never suffer an oppression at the hands of the powerful. So this notion of a unrestrained leadership is the foundation of the United States and the way that the Constitution is being created. And so, however, in modern times, the president of the US has been always described as the most powerful person in the world. And the reason for that is really hard to imagine that somebody who can command the most powerful army, if you agree that America has the most powerful army, is really not that powerful and is accountable to the people. So finding that balance is quite challenging. And somebody like Donald Trump challenges that quite completely, because his way of acting is very much as a leader who is quite authoritative and who wants to get things done, and he doesn't care if people disagree with him, which is very much not what the role of the president was designed to be. So now, there's a fundamental belief in the West that unrestrained power is dangerous. So this notion that anyone having too much power, when you have a situation where somebody is so powerful that people are afraid to question him or her, that person will automatically be dangerous. And it doesn't matter whether they do nice things with that power or bad things with that power. The very notion that someone has power that no one can question is considered to be fundamentally dangerous, and therefore it will be challenged in every way possible. Now, does anybody know who this is and what the story in the news clip is about? Any ideas? Can anybody hear me? Any ideas who this is? Oh, okay, let me see. No. So Kim Jong-il was a very famous a dictator, and I will use that word lightly and not lightly, who was the dictator in North Korea. And I really like this story because in a lot of ways, he was born to be in power. He was the supreme, and because he had an aura around him that he was almost like a god, people never questioned him. Whatever he said was the right thing. And there was an assumption that because he was the leader, he couldn't possibly be wrong. And because of that, any questioning of the leader was considered to be almost a threat. And so one of the reasons is that becomes quite dangerous is because if you have somebody, even someone who's well-intended and who has pure dreams, if they're not questioned, they could end up doing something quite dangerous. And so this story, for me, really illustrates how unrestrained power can be dangerous. So what happened with him is he was obsessed with American cinema. He watched a lot of films, and he wanted to create an incredible cinema for his own country. But for whatever reason, every time he tried to create the films, they never matched the films that he admired from the America. So in a way, he had a very naive, a very pure desire to make cinema great in his country, but he couldn't quite do it. And so he realized that there were two film directors over in China who were making movies that he really enjoyed and he liked. So he ordered some of the people around him to bring them to them. Now, if you say that in a Western country and you say, well, bring them to them, somebody will say, wait, what do you mean bring them to me? What does that actually mean? How are we going to bring them and how are we going to persuade them? You would say things like, okay, well, maybe we'll offer them a lot of money, right? But in a country where nobody questions the supreme leader, when he said, bring them to me, the people who just unquestionably did what he said went to China, kidnapped them and brought them to him. There was no questions asked. Nobody said, wait, do you think this is a good idea? Nobody dared to question him. There was nothing to question. He was the supreme leader. And now maybe he intended to kidnap them, maybe not, but the point is that could never happen in a country where somebody has the power to question the supreme authority. Somebody says, well, actually, that's ridiculous. You can't kidnap two people. That's just, that wouldn't work. And there will be lots of people and checks and balances in place that will prevent that from happening. But so if you imagine something like this happening at a grand scale, so you might have somebody who's very well intentioned and says, okay, gives an order, but doesn't think it through. They're probably they were tired that day, and then other people go and do what they say just because they're the leader. They will end up doing things that probably in the long term are not good, and also they wouldn't be accountable. Say, well, he told me to do it. And so because of that, the democratic system in the US and also in the UK is very much dependent on what we know and outlined as the system of checks and balances. So the US Constitution is the most important document. So when America rebelled against the United Kingdom, they created this document which was meant to be the supreme authority. So not a king. Yeah, so the king was not supposed to be replaced by a president. The king was replaced by the US Constitution. And this idea that everyone is equal before the law. Everyone is equal. Now, in reality, it didn't actually work, and still to this day, it doesn't actually work like that. But in principle, the basic principle is that no one should be above the law, and no one should be able to do whatever they like, whether they're a king or a president or a leader. They are all accountable to the law and therefore accountable to the people. Now, but that's a very nice idea. You're saying, okay, fine, everybody's equal. It's easy to say that, but as we see many examples over the world, everybody says, oh, I'm a democratic leader and I am accountable to the people. The reality is that in most places, not most places, but in some places, that doesn't happen. And it doesn't happen because the systems around it do not function properly, and they are a bit like a show. And in reality, there is no true accountability of the leaders. So the founding fathers thought, how can we make sure that we don't have a leader who suddenly says, you know what, you've elected me as the leader, but now I am going to be leader forever, and I am not going to ever give up power, and you will do exactly as I say. So they wanted to make sure that couldn't happen and wouldn't happen. So they put a number of safeguards in. Yeah. So, and the way they did that is by limiting the power of the president. Yeah. And so the power of the president is limited to a certain extent that the president doesn't have the power to do things, believe it or not. The president has the power to persuade others to do things. So the most powerful thing that the president can do is convince other people around him to do certain things. So there might be a number of things that will surprise you. So for example, the president of the United States has no power of actually passing laws. There are ways around it. There are, something called an executive order that essentially is like a lawmaking power. But that is a very weak power that can only be used in emergencies, and it can be reversed by the court. So the earlier question, if Donald Trump was really that powerful, he could have stopped the riots. Yes, you're right. He could stop the riots. But the fact that he can't isn't that he's not because he doesn't want to. It's because he actually doesn't have the power to do certain things. Believe it, and I'm sure that Mr. Trump was quite surprised at how little power in reality he could have. And I will give you some examples of that. So, as I said, the Constitution was created specifically and definitely to ensure that no one, absolutely no one, had too much power. So what they did is they created 3 branches of government. So at the top over there, you have the Constitution. The Constitution is supreme. It replaces the king. It is the source of all power in the United States. And then, in order to actually carry out the power, there are 3 different bodies. So let's start with the legislative body. The legislative body is the one that actually makes laws. As I say, the president doesn't make laws, the legislative body. So that is Congress, which is then even divided between the Senate and the House of Representatives. So in order for something to become a law, it has to be introduced by a member of Senate or a member of the House, and it has to be approved by one and approved by the other. Now, the president cannot force them to introduce laws. They can't. The president says, I want you to make that law. They can say, sorry, president, we don't want to. Bye-bye. Yeah. So the president has to work with them, right? And then they have to pass it. And so let's say the president decides that they persuades one political party to put a law forward. That law then needs to be approved by the other house. And that's why most of laws that actually are proposed are never actually made, because one thing that the legislative branch is good at is not really making laws, but stopping dangerous laws and stopping stupid laws, if you would. And so a lot of Americans get quite frustrated because they think, well, we've elected this person, they promised they were going to do, they're a lying politician because they actually didn't do what they were supposed to do. But the reality is that when a president says forward, I'm going to do this, they are not actually, even though they say, I am definitely going to do, the only promise they're saying is, I'm going to try to do this, because nothing guarantees that they will have the support in Congress and in houses. And there's a lot of effort goes into actually getting support for those. Now, the second branch is the executive, and the executive is divided into three aspects. So the president, the vice president, who would replace the president if anything happened to the president. So if the president died or stepped down or was impeached, which means removed from office, and the cabinet, which is a group of people who advise the president. Now, if you look at a single person, so the president is the most powerful person, single person. However, Congress as a group is the most powerful branch. Now, Congress makes the laws, the president proposes the laws, Congress then makes the laws. But then we have a third branch, which is the judicial branch. And the judicial branch is made up of the courts. The Supreme Court, which is the most powerful of all the courts. And the Supreme Court has a very important job. And I describe it to my students. They are like the Rottweiler that defends the Constitution, like a guard dog. And the Supreme Court is the ones that decides if any laws that are passed by Congress or any laws passed by the president meet the Constitution. So if the president says, you know what, I'm getting sick of the legislative branch because I told them to pass this law, they're not going to pass it. So I am going to create a state of emergency and I'm going to pass this law. So they pass that law. That law becomes automatically legally binding because the president has said it. However, somebody can then go to the court and say, you know what, the president is doing something here that is unconstitutional. And the Supreme Court can say, I'm sorry, Mr. President, but you're wrong. So that law you created, we're going to erase it. It's like it never happened. And the Supreme Court is so powerful that once the Supreme Court makes a decision, that decision cannot be changed. A decision, saying that something violates the Constitution, that decision cannot be changed unless another Supreme Court makes a decision. And in some cases, they can take years. In some cases, taking over 100 years to reverse a Supreme Court decision. The president can complain about it, say that they don't like it, criticize it, but they cannot change a decision made at the Supreme Court. Now, there is one way the president could change it, and it is the president could try and change the Constitution. But in order to change the Constitution, they would have to have the legislative branch on board, and that is very, very tough. It only has happened a few instances in the U.S. history. So, for example, the U.S. Constitution says that every American citizen has the right to bear arms. So everybody has the right to bear arms. So every time there was a school shooting, Barack Obama would go on TV and say, this is outrageous, we want to change the law. The problem is, it's on the Constitution. So he can't actually change the law. He can try to persuade Congress to change the Constitution, but it would require so many people to agree with it. And actually, so many people make so much money out of selling guns that is really unlikely to change. So the Constitution is designed specifically to be difficult to change and to make the president as powerless as possible. So Now, let's go into a little bit more detail about what each different branch of government can do. So the executive branch, which is the president, they can propose laws. So they can't make, however, one thing they can do is they can veto laws. So in other words, the legislative branch over here says, actually, we're going to pass this law. You know, president said that he was elected because he wanted to, you know, do X, Y, and Z. But actually, we're going to ignore the president and going to create this law. The president can say, you know what, I don't like this law, so I'm going to veto it. So you can't do it. Now, even though the president can veto it, the legislative branch can say, you know what, Mr. President, we don't like what you just said, so we are going to undo your veto. And if they have enough people and enough numbers, they can completely overrule the president. And that has happened. It happened to Obama. He vetoed a law that the legislative branch wanted to allow victims of 9/11 to sue a government that they consider to be supporting terrorism. And Barack Obama vetoed that because he thought it would be ineffective, it wouldn't work. But the legislative branch said, you know what, President Obama, you are wrong, so we're going to override your veto. And so it's very much, it's almost about show. The other thing that is really important, I'm not going to go through all of them in detail because I realize not all of you are politics students, but I'm just going to give you a couple. It's making appointments. So the president has a very important job, and he can choose federal judges, and he can choose judges for the Supreme Court. And that is a very, very important power because, as I said before, the Supreme Court is so powerful that whoever, if somebody makes a decision or a judge in the Supreme Court makes a decision, usually it's a panel of judges that make a decision. That decision cannot be changed for generations. Picking the right person is an important job for the president. However, the legislative branch has to approve whoever the president picks to the Supreme. And the thing is, the president might pick someone because they think, oh yeah, you agree with me, I like your politics, so I'm going to pick you. But once they pick them, that judge can decide against the president, they can decide whatever they like, and they have a job for life. So they cannot be fired and they cannot be touched. And whatever decision they make stands. And so there have been presidents who picked people and thought, okay, I like this guy because he has the same politics as me. And then that person actually made completely different decisions, and the president was really upset and complained and argued in the media about it, but there's nothing they can do because that judge has a job for life. So the executive branch, as they say, they can override the presidential veto. They can ratify treaties. So if the president wants to create a treaty with another country, it has to go to Congress. Although in reality, this doesn't actually happen anymore. They can they decide on the money, and this is a big important job because let's say the president says he wants to build a wall, and they want to spend lots of money. He can't actually spend that money without the approval of Congress. And so if Congress doesn't want the wall to be built, they'll say, you know what, Mr. President, we're not going to give you the money. You want to create it, but sorry, we're not going to give you the money. And actually this happened, and I'll tell you a little bit about there. So the president will go on Twitter and complain and shout and all these things, but ultimately, unless Congress wants to give him the money to do the things he wants to do, he literally can't do. And there is an exception to that. And the exception to that is a state of emergency, because the only time the US president is truly powerful if there is some sort of emergency. Not surprisingly, every single president has had some sort of emergency, because that's the only way to say that they have the power to do what they want to do. So the minute they declare a state of emergency, they can do a lot more. But that is not unrestricted, because the judicial branch can declare executive actions unconstitutional. So the president might say, oh, you know what? I want to build my wall. The legislative branch says, sorry, Mr. President, we're not going to give you the money. And the president says, you know what? I think it's a state of emergency, so I'm going to build it anyway. The Supreme Court, so he can start building it. The Supreme Court can say, sorry, Mr. President, there's really no state of emergency here. You're just making things up. So we're going to say this is unconstitutional. Okay. And so, but they can also do that. The Supreme Court can just as easily say to the legislative branch, say, you're not giving money to the president because, and the way that you're doing this is unconstitutional, so you have to do it. So they are like the arbiter, never-ending fight between the executive branch and the legislative branch. And here the thing is, these institutions are designed to constantly be at odds with each other. They're not supposed to be collaborating with each other. They're not supposed to be friends. The whole point is that there's constantly needs to be conflict. And that when people see is sometimes the US Parliament, the legislative branch and the UK Parliament, you say, well, they're always fighting. They can't be very effective. Well, actually they are, because the whole point is their job is to be, to challenge, to question, to criticize each other. That is the whole point of it, and to prevent the president from having too much power. That's the whole point. So now the president has a lot of formal and informal powers. So formal powers are the ones that are written in the Constitution, and in reality there are very few. But as the role of the president has increased and changed over the year, they have created a lot of more informal powers. And one of the most important one is probably the bully pulpit, which means they are the face of the country, and they can go on the media, they can talk about what things that are important. So you can understand why Donald Trump is complaining all the time about Congress and about this people, about that people, because actually that's his power to speak out and criticize. That is his most important power, because he actually can't really do a lot of other things himself. Okay. Any ideas who this woman is and why I'm sharing her with you? Come on, any guesses? It's really hard for me to know if I'm just saying things.
Nancy Pelosi.
Yes, Nancy Pelosi. And who is she?
She's the Speaker for the United States House of Representatives.
Excellent. And why am I sharing her with you right now?
Because she's important.
Sorry?
Because she's important.
She's important. Okay. What did she do that made Donald Trump very, very unhappy?
She went against him for something that he said some time ago.
Okay.
If I'm not mistaken.
So, Mr. Trump wanted to build the wall. Do we know that? Does everybody know what I mean by that?
Yes.
Building the wall. So he wanted to build the wall between Mexico and this. One of the biggest things that he wanted to be elected to. And he's almost finished his presidency, and the wall is not finished. I mean, bits of it have been built, but it's not finished. And the reason for that is because in order to build his wall, he needed money. And in order to get money, he needed the House of Representatives, which is the branch of government that controls the money, to approve his budget. Ms. Nancy Pelosi, who is a representative of a different political party, the Democrats, and her party, they decided that they prefer to shut down the government. In other words, nobody who works for the government would get paid, and to refuse to approve Trump's spending plan in order to block those. So in other words, the entire government shut down. No one could get any money simply because the Democrats did not want to give any money to President Trump to build his wall. And this is a reminder that even though he said he was going to build it, even though he's the most powerful person, he actually cannot override what the House of Representatives said, because they control the money. And this Constitution says that they control the money precisely for this point, precisely to stop a president doing something that a lot of people disagree with. Now, if his party, the Republican Party, was controlling the House of Representatives, they probably would have approved it. Yeah. But a lot of people were elected with the specific objective to block President Trump from doing what he would. Okay. So remember, the US president cannot pass laws. Although I have to give Mr. Trump quite a bit of credit, because he is very creative. So what he did immediately was very predictably saying that there was a state of emergency, there was too many people coming to the borders, and he wanted to build his wall to do that. And he's managed to find ways around to still build bits of the wall. Now, I think he has done a lot to do it, and the Democrats have done as much as they can to stop him. And so I don't think it will be completely built the way that he wanted it, but he's actually done a lot more than I expected him to do. So he's actually managed to push through and get as many things done as he wanted. Anybody know what this is about? Any ideas?
Another riot.
And okay, it's interesting the word. Do we know what the difference between a riot and a protest?
The riot is more aggressive.
Yeah, so a riot, it tends to be violent, and a protest. Now, you might say, why is it that in America there's constantly people on the streets complaining? Now, protesting and peaceful protesting is an absolutely fundamental aspect of a democratic government. In fact, it's so important that it's actually protected in the US Constitution. So one of the reasons that Donald Trump cannot stop it is because the right to protest, it is a fundamental right protected in the Constitution, and he cannot prevent people from doing it, because the right to people to go on the street to say that they do not like what the government is doing is fundamental to American history, because that's how they got rid of the king that they had, and that is why that is how the leaders are accountable to the people. So this right to protest, it is one of the most important rights. So what's happening here? Anybody heard about the Muslim, or what the media have called the Muslim ban?
It happened at the start of his presidency, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So what happened?
There was a shooting in California, if I'm not mistaken, and like Donald Trump kept on going on and on social media about how Muslims were all terrorists. And once he became president, he decided to enact the Muslim ban.
Okay. So remember what I said before, that the president cannot pass laws. And the only time the president can pass laws if there is a state of emergency. So it's predictable that he will say, oh, we have an emergency, we have all these people coming into our country, and we want to stop them. So he did something called an executive, and that executive order prevented people coming to the US from a number of Muslim nations. And so what happens with an executive order, because it's supposed to be an emergency power, is that it's immediately effective. So that meant that people who got on the plane legally became illegal immigrants on the air and were stopped once they arrived in the United States and sent back to their country, because the law had changed whilst they were in the air. Of course, this was immediately challenged in the courts and say, well, people say this is unconstitutional, and the basis for that is people were saying that in the context of what this ban was given, it was based on race, on religion. It was not based on actual security threats, and so some of the courts said that this was unconstitutional. Then the president had to reword it and tweak it, and change it so that it wasn't all people who were Muslim, or it had to be more restricted, more targeted. And so people went on the street to express how unhappy they were. Eventually, the Supreme Court said that as the commander-in-chief, he had the power to enact to close the borders if he wished to. And so this was upheld by the Supreme Court, which was considered to be a victory for Donald Trump, although it was a victory for Donald Trump, but not in its original version. So the first thing that they did was not considered to be good enough. It was thrown out, so they had to readjust it and change it to make it safer and make it fair. So you might think, okay, well, Donald Trump won in the end. Yes, he got what he wanted in one way, but the other way, his decision was questioned and tempered and reassess and fixed to make sure that it wasn't a violation of human rights, because there are certain characteristics that are protected by the Constitution. So you're right, religion, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation is actually not written in it's not written in the Constitution, but there are cases that have interpreted so that it is now protected. It's quite complicated how the Supreme Court brings new rights into the world, but that's one of the ways. So as you can see, there was a presidential decision. That presidential decision was challenged. In the end, the president who did manage to get away with what he wanted, but it was not in the original version. It had to be temporarily rewarded. And the whole point is that this makes it safer, and the fact that people protest creates pressure from politicians to actually, protest against Donald Trump. Any idea who this guy is and why I'm sharing him with you?
He's Brett Kavanaugh.
Very good, Brett Kavanaugh. Can you tell us who Brett Kavanaugh is and why was he in the news? What was there controversy about him?
Donald Trump appointed him to become the head of the Supreme Court, like the head judge.
Just a member of the Supreme Court. Yes, just be a judge in the Supreme Court.
Yeah. But there was a lot of reports going on about how he was involved in sexual harassment, like he harassed some people, and there was a lot of hate.
So remember, the president can appoint somebody to the Supreme Court, and this is actually probably the most influential thing that Donald Trump would have done in his presidency, because after Donald Trump is gone, this guy will be in his job until he dies, right? So he will be in the Supreme Court. He cannot be fired. He cannot be challenged for decisions. Of course, if he commits a crime and that can be proven, he can be impeached. But if all goes as well, he will continue to be in the Supreme Court for an entire generation. So appointments to the Supreme Court are so important for a president because they actually can shape the laws for hundreds of years. One of the biggest controversies over this man was that abortion is a huge topic in the United States. It's an incredibly divisive topic. And so people who believe that women have the right over their own bodies and should have the right to decide whether or not they want to have an abortion are on one side of the political spectrum, and on the other side there's people on religious reasons believe that abortion is murder and women should not be allowed to make the decisions. So a lot of people are worried that this Supreme Court justice will be more conservative. In other words, he will make decisions that will restrict a woman's right to have an abortion. And the reason in America it is legal to have abortion is because of an earlier Supreme Court decision, and it's called Roe versus Wade. You can look it up. And it was a case where it was decided that a woman had the right to make that change. That became law automatically. And because it was a Supreme Court decision, no precedent can actually change it. So in order to make abortion illegal, the only way to do that in the United States, well, there are different ways, but the only way to make it illegal to the whole country is to having another Supreme Court decision that would reverse it. So a lot of people that opposed Trump were very worried that somebody like Brett Kavanaugh would be somebody who would vote against Roe v. Wade, so and make abortions illegal. And you might think, well, why would an entire country care so much about this one issue? But it's a huge divisive issue in the United States. It's actually incredibly, you have senators in the middle of nowhere who get voted in or voted out based on this particular topic, particularly because the church in the US, many churches have a lot of money. So any candidate that says, I am going to stand against abortion will automatically get a lot of money. And so this is why one of the reasons it was controversial. But if you remember, the president appoints them, but they cannot give them the job. It has to be the legislative branch, the Senate in particular, who has to approve them. So through the approval process, it's like a job interview that is kind of like a trial. So all the dirt on about his life, he was accused of attempted rape. There was a lot of protest on the street about that because his appointment to the Supreme Court is arguably a lot more important than a president's appointment to becoming president, because a president, you can get rid of them after 4 years, but a Supreme Court justice is forever. Any idea what this story is about? Any ideas?
They're trying to get Donald Trump out of office.
Yes, so impeachment is another important power that the legislative branch is. If they think that the president has broken the law or done something that amounts to what they call high treason, they can remove him from office. So remember Nancy Pelosi? She was in charge of the House of Representatives. So the House of Representatives has the power of starting what we call impeachment procedures. So impeachment procedures is like an accusation. It's like charging someone with a crime and say, you've done something and we want you to not be president anymore. And then the Senate, which is the other part of the legislative branch, they have the power of actually carrying out the trial, listening to the evidence and making a decision. So what happened is that Donald Trump was accused or impeached by the Senate, and then he went to the House of Representatives, and then he went to the Senate to make the actual decision. And the Senate, what happened is that even though he was accused by the House, the Senate went, you know what, we don't want to listen to this evidence. You are just complaining for political purposes. There is no merit in here, so we're actually not going to remove him from office. So he was saved by the Senate. And many people will argue is that this trial is a bit like a show trial because it's very political. So the people who accused them happened to be people of the opposite power, and the people that saved him happened to be the people from his same party. And it all comes down to the numbers they have in each house. So a lot of people think this is actually quite pointless because it's all very political, and it's quite it's a waste of time. But actually now Donald Trump has become the U.S. president in history to be impeached. And so second or third? I think second. And that's going to be a stain on his record, for the rest of it. So he could have been removed from office. As it turns out, he wasn't removed from office, but he was stopped from doing a lot of things. So if he does a lot of things that anger people, his opponents, he's going to be having a very difficult time because they will throw anything they can at him. So it's in his best interest, if he wants to get things done, to actually appease people and not anger so many people, because otherwise he will get nothing done. He will be 4 years in office and really get very little done. Although, to be fair, Donald Trump has actually managed to do quite a bit, considering how many obstacles have been put in his way by the other parties, which, it's their job. Okay, I don't know if I'm running out of time, but anybody know what this is? Or what this is talking about? Okay, so President Obama, he created something that is now called Obamacare, and that was hugely controversial because Obamacare meant to give something like free healthcare for all Americans. And you can imagine this was really, really expensive. And a lot of people had to pay lots of money for it. So a lot of Americans were very, very upset about this. So one of the things that Donald Trump wanted to do, President Trump wanted to do, was to get rid of Obamacare. And so he set out to do that in his presidency. And he has managed to dismantle most of it, but he hasn't managed to do all of it, again, because he needs the House of Representatives to be able to do that, and he doesn't have a lot of support and a lot of friends there. So even though he's managed to do some of it, he hasn't managed to repeal all of it. Now, so the ultimate check on the power of the president is re-election. So do you expect Donald Trump to win the 2020 election? The president can only run for 2 terms. So he can only run, he runs for 4 years. After 4 years, he has to go up to the people for re-election. After the next 4 years, he will, if he wins, he serves for more years, but he cannot run for another years. And the founding fathers thought that it was fundamentally important for a president to have a limit on their power, because they thought, regardless of how good a president is, that president will be good for some, not for all. So, and there is this program called the West Wing, and it says the best thing about a democracy is that every 4 years you get to overthrow the government. And that's very true, because no matter how popular anyone is, there will be people who don't like them. So Barack Obama was very popular, but actually there was a lot of people who didn't like them. And because of that, that's Donald Trump, who's completely the polar opposite of Barack Obama, became elected because a lot of people didn't like him. And so the same happens with Donald Trump. And so this time limit, it is absolutely fundamental to a working and legitimate democracy. The minute a leader goes and says, I am going to be leader for life, you know a democracy is dead. So that is one of the most important aspects, because that is what keeps a president in, the power of a president in. And that's it from me. I realize we have maybe 5 minutes for questions. Any questions about that? What do I think about the situation in the US? Do you mean the current protests over the charges of police homicide? Okay, it's a very, very tricky situation because there is a lot of history there. Race relationships in the United States are very complicated, and it is something that has traced back for a very long time. And I think that a lot of people are very angry because they feel that they're being victimized, and they feel that the police get away with murder in many cases. And in a country like the US, where there's so many guns, and there's huge in numbers of police corruption and brutality, and there's a great deal of racism. And my personal opinion is that Donald Trump hasn't helped that. In fact, he's made it much worse by saying the things that he says, encouraging people to be racist and to create that, and that creates anger, and that anger will eventually turn violent, which is actually not something I would like to see. But there is a lot of history that, and I don't think this is going to be solved anytime soon. And the worst thing that the president can do is continue with the rhetoric that he's saying. Obviously, I have a political bias. I'm not particularly somebody who's Donald Trump, but I also don't support violent riots and violent protests. So there has to be some sort of middle ground of people, finding a long-lasting solution. And I think that realistically, the only way that that's going to happen is that they have a better president that doesn't say the things he says. But even then, I don't think that's going to solve the problem. Any further questions? I know you have all the talks today, so I don't want to make you late.
Okay, it doesn't look like there are any further questions now, Jessie. But if anyone does have any further questions they would like to ask, then do feel free to email us directly at international@mpw.ac.uk, and that way we can always forward your questions to Jessie and she can answer directly. But Jessie, I'd just like to say thank you so much. It's really, really informative for me. I've learned a lot actually, so thank you very much. And I think we'll leave it as it is now. This will be available to view again because we've recorded this session. But yeah, that's it from me. I'm going to sign off. Jessie, do you want to sign off with anything?
No, that's everything. So if any have any questions, oh, there's one more.
There is one
question.
more.
What do you think? I don't know, and I'm gonna put my hands up here. I don't know enough about it to give you a useful opinion on that. I'll have to think about it, and if you give me your email address, I'll get back to you because I know that there is a lot of moving parts with something as massive as the OPEC deal, and I don't want to commit to something without actually properly looking onto the latest information on that.
What was the question?
The question is, what do you think about breaking the OPEC deal?
Interesting stuff. It's going to open up a lot of debates, I think. One to watch. All right, so thank you so much then, everybody. Thank you for those that attended, and of course thank you so much to Jessie. I think the email has just been left there for you, Jessie, if you wouldn't mind. If you want to communicate directly, we'll also send you some additional information for you as well, Konstantin. So thank you again, and stay safe. And that's it from me. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.